after those ballots are settled, and all names on the ballot will be welcome then.
There will be no opening statements tonight. There will be closing statements from the candidates. The candidates will have 60 seconds to answer most of the questions. There is a countdown clock that is visible to them.
These candidates have participated in many forums where one question is asked to the entire group. This is the first televised debate. The purpose here is to differentiate between the candidates to allow them to share their opinions and experience and help voters make more informed choices when they go to the ballot. We will occasionally ask for a show of hands or a short answer to a question in order to tease out differences between the candidates on stage.
All right, those are the rules. Let's get started. Candidates, a survey of Democratic primary voters in Colorado found that their three chief concerns are, in order, affordable health care, ending gun violence, and public education. So let's start with those three important issues in order, and you're all going to be heard on every one of those issues. Ms. Kennedy, we begin with you. You support a public option for health care, a Medicaid for all system. Why is expanding that program the right approach?
Well, Kyle, thank you for having us here tonight. And the challenge that so many families in Colorado are facing with health care is cost. We've been able to expand health insurance to almost 95% of the people in our state. It is a great success for Colorado. But I hear too often on this campaign from families that are having to spend $2,000 or more a month when you add up premiums and out-of-pocket costs and pharmaceutical costs. So we need to do more to control the costs of health care, which is why I am calling for Colorado to offer a public health insurance option. People would still be able to buy what they have today, but it would be another alternative, the opportunity to purchase into the state's Medicaid program or either of the plans that we offer our state employees. We can offer those insurance plans for less than what's being offered in the private market, and we should pass those savings on to everyone in Colorado.
Ms. Lynne, before becoming lieutenant governor, you were a high-level executive for a health insurance company. How do you defend yourself?
Oh, I don't need to defend myself at all. In fact, I've been on multiple sides of the healthcare conversation for the last 40 years. A patient, a purchaser of healthcare as an employer, a provider of in a public hospital system, and yes, in two nonprofit insurance companies that are committed to serving all Coloradans, whether they're in Medicaid, Medicare, or in the private market. So my view on healthcare is it's got to be universal. We have to provide it to every Coloradan, and we have to make the decision to do that and to change the way that we think about healthcare. The state is a great purchaser of healthcare. We do it now for our employees and retirees, and we've got the opportunity to use our leverage to purchase for many more people in Colorado. But affordability is an issue in addition to access. And we've got to tackle every element of the healthcare industry, pharma, health plans, hospitals, and doctors, and get them to work with us.
As quickly as you can, do we need to be moving away from private sector coverage for people?
You know, I don't think we need to be moving away from private sector coverage because employers and sometimes employees prefer to do that. So a menu of options, I think, is important. And as you know, competition also is really important in healthcare. Where we have monopolies, we have higher prices, and we've got to encourage more competition.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Johnston, let me ask you, I know that you support expanding Colorado's health coverage for low-income families to include families that are living in this country illegally. And you have to know that in a general election, a Republican opponent is going to say, here is somebody who wants to reward illegal immigration with welfare benefits. Why do you think that it's the right thing to do?
I think sometimes as a leader you have to make the choice to do what the right thing to do is, no matter what the challenges are. And I think this is the right thing to do, not just because it's the right moral thing to do, it's the right financial thing to do. When you have kids that are uninsured in Colorado, they're still going to be guaranteed coverage. They're just going to be getting coverage in emergency rooms instead of in primary care doctor's offices, which is where you can go much farther, much less expensively to actually make an impact on them. And so I do think we should extend coverage to every income-eligible child in Colorado. But in addition to that, I think, yes, we have to bring competition to other parts of the state. Healthcare is a right, not a privilege, but that right only works if you can get access to it. And so that means that we have to make sure that we offer a public option for Medicaid for folks that are living any place where they have plans that are unaffordable. It also means we have to focus on making price transparency available so folks know how much procedures cost when they go to seek them, and that we focus on the major mental health and behavioral health crisis, which is roiling Colorado right now, which we haven't paid enough attention to. I think that's part of the solution here statewide.
Ms. Kennedy, 2 years ago, this state had a statewide vote on Colorado Care, a state single-payer health care system. In the same election that Hillary Clinton won Colorado, that didn't just lose, it got smoked 80-20, down in flames. That's more than a disconnect on messaging, I think. Colorado Care was $25 billion in new taxes, 10% on payrolls split between employers and employees. When you start to think about a public option, how much do you think it would cost?
Yeah, and like a lot of people in our state, I didn't support that proposal. I don't think Colorado alone can work a single payer system. We need support and help from Washington, but the difference with my plan, Brendan, is it doesn't cost taxpayers money. People would purchase a public health insurance option and pay premiums in the same way they purchase private health insurance, but we can offer a more affordable package, particularly in the counties where right now there's only one carrier and there isn't competition in the market and prices are very high. We should pass savings along to folks that are in areas of our state where they just simply can't afford their health insurance. I have heard from people who live on the Western Slope, they have some of the highest healthcare costs in the country, that they may have to move to Denver, to the Front Range, simply because they can't afford their health insurance. So when we can offer a less expensive alternative, we should take that opportunity and do it and pass those savings on to the people of Colorado.
Ms. Lynne, you heard Mr. Johnston reference transparency in pricing for health care. And right now, the Comprehensive Health Care Transparency Act is currently before the state legislature. So it would force doctors and pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies to be upfront with patients about what care is going to cost, the same way that you know how much a meal is going to cost at a restaurant. This is expected to be vociferously opposed by people in your former industry. Do you support that transparency bill?
Well, Kyle, I not only support it, but last year worked with the legislature to bring a similar bill to Colorado, and unfortunately it got defeated in the Senate by the Republicans. So even though we had some good Republicans who thought, I'm going to do the right thing and join with Democrats who care about price transparency, we were unable to get that done. So I totally support it. You get your car, change your oil, you do other things. We know what our prices are, we make decisions, and quite frankly, we've got to hold the feet to the fire and give consumers the information they need, as well as have a conversation about profits in healthcare, because there are profits throughout the entire healthcare industry, and we're all paying for it as patients and as employers.
Mr. Johnston, Obamacare came with the individual mandate, one of the most controversial parts of it, kind of like the concept that if you're driving a car, you need to have insurance, you need to have health insurance, only we all have, bodies that need care from time to time. So you don't really have the option about buying a car or not in this case. This is your health we're talking about. Was the individual mandate worth the trade-off to get more covered? cover?
Yeah, well, I think it was. And why you've seen that is we now have more than 95% of Coloradans covered. And what you realize is if you don't have people covered, what's going to happen is they are just freeloading off of a system where the rest of the taxpayers are still paying for their health care coverage. So if you are not covered and you break a leg when you're skiing or have an injury in your home, you're still going to go to a Colorado emergency room, and the rest of the taxpayers are going to foot that bill in the form of unreimbursed care. And so it not only provides people better health coverage to have everybody covered, it actually is a fiscally better choice for the state, which I think goes a lot farther. And this is also why I think, this price transparency argument, you mentioned earlier, dogs, I always give the example, we had a dog who was quite ill. Whenever I went to the vet, and the vet would sit down and say, here are the 4 procedures we're considering, and here's what they all cost. When I take one of my 3 kids to the doctor, that doesn't happen. I wait until 3 weeks later and I get a surprise bill in the mail that might be $2,000, $3,000. I think the same things we expect when we take our pets for care, we ought to expect for our kids.
Let's turn to another of the chief concerns identified in recent surveys of Democratic primary voters, ending gun violence. Mr. Johnston, you spoke last on the first topic. I'm going to ask you first on this second topic. You've spoken passionately on the issue of gun violence for years and years. I would like you to lay out as specifically as possible what increased gun control measures you would advocate for as governor, and then also more philosophically, is this an issue where a state like Colorado needs to find consensus, or is this an issue where if Democrats have the power, they need to push through all the gun control they can?
This month, Kyle, will mark the 19th anniversary of the Columbine shooting, and after they buried those students, they built a memorial outside that read, "This day brought the nation to its knees. But when we got up, what had changed?" I think for decades, folks felt like there was no change on things that seemed obvious. After the Aurora Theater shooting, when we looked out and I was in the state Senate, we said it seems obvious to us and to me as a lifetime gun owner that no one needs a 100-round magazine to hunt an elk, and that no one should be exempt from having to get a background check when they buy a gun. And so I was proud to sponsor those bills. I was proud that I fought the NRA on those two issues and won. Now, I think there's more work left to be done, which is I think Colorado ought to pass what we call gun violence restraining orders or red flag laws, which would keep guns out of the hands of those who are a danger to themselves or a danger to others. I think we also ought to ban bump stocks going forward. And these are areas where I think you can find some area of common agreement. You know, I go to a lot of the conservative talk radio shows, and I've gotten a number of them to agree to the idea that gun violence restraining orders are the right step. And I think many of the Republican gubernatorial candidates have now come out and supported it. I think the country is demanding change right now, and it requires someone with the courage to lead on it.
I want to follow up on this because, again, this has been an issue that you've talked about for a long time. Your state Senate district was in an area in Northeast Park Hill, North Park Hill. It's been affected by summers of violence for a long time. The gun control measures you're describing are ones that, depending on the day, are sometimes even supported by President Trump. That truly is as far as you would go as governor.
Well, I think there are 4 key things you have to do. We've described our platform as 4 no more. One is you want to get military-style weapons off the streets of Colorado, and that is in the form of banning these high-capacity magazines that make these weapons so deadly. Second is you have to require universal background checks every time you ever buy a gun from anyone, any place. The third is you got to ban bump stocks, and the fourth is you have to put in place these red flag laws.
So no ban on so-called assault weapons.
Colorado's fortunate that we have 2 of these done already. Most states haven't, and the U.S. Congress has not been able to do that.
Sure.
So we only have 2 more places left to go.
No ban on so-called assault weapons, correct?
The most important part of an assault weapon is the size of the magazine. When you look at the definition of an assault weapon, it's the caliber, it's a pistol grip, and it is the size of the magazine. What kills 25 people, 70 people at a time are high-capacity magazines. That's what we banned and we have to protect because the Republican nominees have called to repeal that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Kennedy, very much in the same vein, Colorado passed a couple of laws we just heard talked about in 2013, both a capacity limit for magazines, also universal background checks, a version of that. What else as governor would you advocate doing specifically that you think would actually make a difference for gun violence?
So, Brandon, last spring, my daughter's high school went on lockdown because there was a shooting out on the street outside of the school. I think for every mom, for every parent, for every grandparent in this country, we watch in horror the incidences of mass gun violence in our country. And here in Colorado, we certainly have felt that more deeply with the shootings in Aurora. The shootings at Columbine. So I have long called for and will continue as governor to ban the military-style assault weapons that are designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And I believe the vast majority of gun owners in our state and in our country are law-abiding citizens. They use their guns for law-abiding purposes, but they agree that these weapons of war have no place in our streets, including the devices that convert standard firearms like bump stocks and silencers. And I also agree, complete background checks and red flag laws here in Colorado.
Why is it important to you to go beyond what Mr. Kennedy said as far as, or Johnston, excuse me, I apologize, Mr. Johnston said, to go from the magazine capacity to the style of the weapon itself, the assault weapons ban that you described?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Mike said is right. Colorado took a big step in limiting the magazine size. That really does, in essence, ban the kind of capacity that we saw used in Las Vegas, that we saw used in Aurora. That law is keeping all of us safer, and I hope when you have the Republicans on this stage tomorrow night, you ask them their position on that law, because as governor, I will defend it. It is keeping the people of Colorado safer.
Ms. Lynne, I would like to hear if you have any substantive disagreement with the other 2 candidates on this issue of what gun control they would implement as governor. But I know that you've also described the issue as a public health issue. So in addition to outlining what increased gun control you would support, please also describe what role you think doctors have in talking to people about their guns. That's been a very controversial concept.
Sure, and I think as Democrats, we all are in favor of additional controls on guns. We're actually working right now in the Capitol on the red flag law itself, and even if we can't get it through the legislature, and that could be political, we are looking at whether or not the administration can implement a red flag law. So absolutely, bans on bump stocks, national universal background checks, and limits in terms of the semi-automatic weapons. But you're right. This is not just about supply of guns. It's about a culture. And it's about changing a culture and thinking about how we take a look at who's committing some of these mass shootings. They're mostly men. And disenfranchised in some way, and so trying to find ways that we can help them, we can destigmatize mental health, we can do the right thing in terms of providing treatment. I guess the other thing nobody talked about is I will not support arming teachers in our schools with guns to protect students. We need security guards to do that, not teachers.
Just to clarify, though, I specifically asked you whether doctors have any role. Is it a doctor's business what guns are in somebody's home?
I think it's a doctor's business to talk about some of the issues that lead to gun violence. I don't think doctors should be checking whether there's guns in a home or knives in a home or anything like that, but recognizing behavior that might lead to violence, whether it's self-inflicted violence like suicide that we have in Colorado, or it's violence against other people.
Thank you.
All right. And just since you brought it up, for the benefit of the audience at home, neither of you wants to see guns in the hands of teachers? I don't see hands going up. All right, very much. Appreciate it. All right, Ms. Lynne, since we started with the other two on our first two topics, we'll start the third one with you. We're going to pivot to public education, which was an issue identified by Colorado Democratic primary voters. You have pointed to Tabor, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, as an obstacle to public education. We're going to talk Tabor a little bit more later, but assuming that that law stays intact, what other state spending are you willing to take from in order to beef up public education?
Well, I think there's a couple things that we're doing right now. As you know, we are putting more money into the public schools in the current budget that's beginning in 2018. I think when we get to the Tabor conversation, we've got to talk about all the constitutional financial restrictions that we have and really say, shouldn't we trust our public elected officials to do the right thing in terms of how they fund the key services that we have? Now, one thing that I'm running on as a candidate for governor is my ability to tackle some of the healthcare costs. And as you know, healthcare has become a larger piece of the budget pie. And if we're able to effectively control the costs in Medicaid while continuing to ensure coverage, I think we can actually expand what we can spend in public education. And failing that, I would support a tax initiative to address the needs that we have in our public education system.
Mr. Johnston, you've proposed the Colorado Promise program, which would offer 2 years of paid tuition at a community college for any Coloradan who's interested in return for service in a, best described as like a Peace Corps type operation here for the state, service 10 to 12 weekends a year. Estimated cost $47 million when it's all ramped up. You want to pay for it through online sales tax revenues largely. Where would you be diverting those revenues from, and what happens if we create your new entitlement program and then the economy goes south and we lose that revenue and these people are counting on your college program?
Sure. I just want to say one quick last comment about guns because this topic is so important. The 4 issues that I mentioned, the 4 parts of the plan we've proposed, if you look back over almost every one of the mass shootings over the last 20 years in this country, one of those 4 issues were at play in every single one. Bump stocks, high-capacity magazines, failed red flags, the background checks. So you stop a great majority of those. I would also say the only problem about gun violence is not about mass shootings. If you look in Colorado last year alone, almost 800 gun deaths in Colorado last year, more than 600 of those were from suicide, which is why these gun violence restraining orders are so important to also keep guns out of the hands of folks who we know are a danger to themselves.
And your remaining 30 seconds on Colorado Promise,
yes,
please.
Colorado Promise. So the purpose is, this is why, so our focus is all about how do you build the future of education, which is folks aren't going to be okay with a high school degree anymore for the rest of their life. They have to reskill and upskill at different stages of their life, and that means being able to get access to those skills in a way that everyone can afford it. Colorado Promise is paid for. We have more than 3 times the cushion of the funding we would need to cover this program, so we believe it allows folks to get the training they need to get to the jobs that are coming, so we're ready for the dynamics that are emerging where industries are going to die overnight and new ones will grow. We need a new education system to fit that new economy.
In a word, where is that $47 million currently being spent that you would move to this program?
So right now, you mentioned this comes from an online sales tax. So I sponsored the bill to require us to collect online sales from places like Amazon. Used to be only brick and mortar buildings paid. Amazon sued us for 5 years. It's just now into effect. So this year there's $5 million a year. There will be growth up to $160 million in that fund. So that is new revenue to the system that would come for this program.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. So, Ms. Kennedy, you've outlined education as your top priority in this race. You've called for increasing teacher pay, which unsurprisingly has turned out to be very popular with teachers, and they support you in droves. So I'm curious, how would you come up with the funding to do that? And then how would you go about telling, say, a rural school district that has a lot of needs, in addition to higher pay for teachers, that they have to spend that money on teacher pay if they would rather spend it on facilities or supplies and equipment for students?
Yeah, so Kyle, I'm so glad you're asking about education. I think we need to make public education our state's top priority. It isn't just a concern of Democrats, it's a concern of everyone in this state who see Colorado as having the top-ranked economy in the country, and yet we rank at the bottom in the investment that we make in our education system, in K through 12 and higher education. Half of the school districts in Colorado today have cut back to a 4-day school week. We are losing great teachers who are leaving the profession, they are leaving the state because they can't afford to live here, they can't afford to work here. So we are not giving the kids who are growing up here in Colorado the opportunities that they need and deserve to be competitive in this tremendous, innovative, forward-looking, knowledge-based economy that we're building here. And we need to start by supporting our teachers, and that includes raising their pay.
I heard a lot of why there and not a lot of how. The question was, how do you come up with the money, and how do you tell local districts that they have to use it to pay the teachers who support you as opposed to what they might choose to spend it on?
Yeah, so the first thing we need to do is fix our fiscal structure. Our Tabor amendment has restrained our spending in education. We've been cutting the education budgets for almost 3 decades. That needs to stop. I will lead as governor to build a bipartisan coalition to go to the voters of this state and lay out a plan that enables Colorado to build an education system that we can all be proud of. And school districts across this state, whether they're the smallest rural district in the state or the largest urban or suburban district, they all want to pay their teachers more because they know that in order for their kids to succeed, they need to be attracting talent into their schools.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Johnston, how are you? Some in the party would say they see charter schools as an attack on public education, a way of weakening school districts. In 2015, you voted with Republicans in the state Senate, it was Bill 216 in that year, to undo the authority that poorly performing districts have over charter schools. Now, Democrats ended up killing that bill on the House side. How do you defend your vote to someone who feels that charter schools hurt other public schools?
So I think we have to talk about school funding as well as about the types of schools that we fund, so I want to come back to that. But I think one of the things we find from parents is what parents care most about is making sure that they have a high-quality school that is close to them where they can send their kids. I think they care less about what the management of that public school is. And so what we've tried to support is options for multiple schools for parents, but that those schools have to play by the same set of rules. So I was also the one to sponsor legislation to say charters ought to play by the same set of rules, which means they ought to serve all kids, and they ought to make sure that they take enrollment like other schools take it. So if you move into the district in December, you could have still a choice for which schools you go to. Because what you had previously is you had some schools where what was happening was you might have 50% of the kids that were low income in that district, but you have a charter school who's only serving 10% of the kids that are low income. Well, we can't deny a school district's ability to give that school a charter. What we can do, and I passed legislation to do, is to say we can cut state funding if you don't serve all of the schools that are in your community. So I think those public schools can play an important role as long as they commit to serving all kids and keep that promise.
Mr. Johnston, thank you. Ms. Lynne, we've seen you on the record about the importance of college and getting kids into college courses early. I'm curious if you think that the state could use more vocational education and whether that ought to be put on the same pedestal as going down the path of college.
Great. Well, thanks. First of all, I'd like to just make sure everybody knows I'm a product of the public schools, K through 16, and a big believer in funding them adequately, and also our higher education institutions. But we have to recognize not everybody is going to go to college. Not everybody has the financial capacity to go to college, at least right away. And as an employer, we honestly didn't need everybody to have a college degree. And there are great paying jobs in technical fields. Look at a lot of the young people today now. They're not going to college, but they're starting businesses. They're coding. They're doing other things that are very entrepreneurial in fashion. So how we make our community colleges and employers and our four-year degree institution as well understand where the puck is going, literally, in terms of careers in the future, is something I'm going to lead very passionately with. I don't think 100% of all high school students should go to college. We've got to figure out how to give them apprenticeship programs and training and get them into jobs and potentially later on into college.
We've talked about the issues that are of chief importance to Colorado's Democratic primary voters. Eventually, a Democratic candidate is going to emerge into a general election in which the primary concern of Republican primary voters is illegal immigration. So I want to hear from all of you on this. Mr. Johnston first. The state of California has a so-called sanctuary state law, which prohibits local law enforcement from notifying immigration agents about pending releases from Colorado jails. Would you support a similar bill here in Colorado?
So I wouldn't. I think the right answer for Colorado is what we know is that we should never waste time reporting to ICE information about minor infractions. So folks that have speeding tickets or busted taillights who are getting arrested and reported and deported. That's what's driving the fears that are leading, drop in attendance at schools because parents don't want to drop their kids off at schools. I think, however, when you have serious violent crimes, when you have murders or you have sex assaults, I think we do have an interest in public safety and sharing that information with both federal law enforcement as well as state. But I think the deeper question is, how are we actually going to get progress on what feel like really divisive issues like immigration? This was the reason I ran for the state senate in the first place. I was the principal of a school where we got all of our students admitted to college, and then I found out almost half those students were undocumented and couldn't go to college without paying extra tuition. So I ran for the state senate, got elected, and a bill that had failed 12 years in a row because it never had bipartisan support, I was finally able to get Republicans on to support it for the first time, which meant we solved that problem and let kids we'd made investments in over 12 years get access to college so they could be the nurses and teachers and engineers we need.
And just quickly, DUI, report to immigration or not?
I would report those.
Okay. Ms. Kennedy, same question to you. Would you support a California-style sanctuary state bill here which would prevent local law enforcement from notifying ICE of pending jail departures?
Yeah, so that term's being used in a lot of different contexts. There really isn't a common definition. I think what's really important for Colorado is that people who are here can feel safe in their communities, and we protect public safety. So we need our local law enforcement to be a support and a resource to everyone who's living in a community. You wouldn't want to create the kind of fear and anxiety where people wouldn't report child abuse, or they wouldn't report a crime if they see it being committed, or they're fearful, as Mike pointed out, to take their children to school or take their children to a library. I am hearing stories as I travel the state of employers when people show up to collect their paycheck are being told, your paycheck is, we're not going to call ICE. We need our local law enforcement to be responsive to the needs of the citizens in our communities. And immigration reform needs to be enforced by federal immigration authorities.
So yes or no to that bill?
I don't know the specifics of that bill.
No, I would describe it. It would prevent local law enforcement from notifying immigration officials of jail releases.
Of nonviolent offenders.
Where would you draw the line? I apologize. The time is up.
If somebody's committed a violent offense, we need to report it to ICE.
Okay. And I'll ask you the same question. DUI, report or not report?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Okay. Ms. Lynne, and I apologize, I'm going to ask you to answer the question, which is, do you support a California-style sanctuary state bill which prevents local law enforcement from notifying ICE about jail departures?
One thing you're going to know about me as a candidate, I like to be direct. I would not support it, but I'd change the conversation, because the conversation really is about, as you said, healthcare, guns, public education, hopefully we'll get to environment, transportation. And if the Republicans are going to create a lot of noise about an issue that I think is not the most important issue that we have to face, the important issue is we have people here who are working, who've been brought here by their parents. We need to recognize they're productive citizens. And I think whether we're talking about a wall or we're talking about sanctuary cities and demonizing them, that the Republicans are trying to throw up smoke screens around the most important issues we have to face in this state. And that's not one of them.
I appreciate the direct answer, but just everybody's been heard on this, so let me ask you again. Where do you think the line is in terms of reporting some infractions to ICE and not others?
I think things that are violent are certainly important to report. Again, minor infractions, I'm not worried about. In fact, that's one of the biggest problems we have in our correctional system now with recidivism. People make a big deal about it. It's for often minor infractions that we send people back to jail.
I'll ask one more time. DUI, report or not report?
Non-report.
Thank you.
All right. I've got another question for the entire group. We're going to change the order up a little bit. There's been a lot of debate over the future of Tabor. I promise you we'd talk about it, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Leaving aside everything else about it and whatever modifications might come up for debate. As governor, would you protect its core principle that the voters need to consent to any new taxes that are going to be levied against them? And we'll start with you, Ms. Kennedy.
Yes. I think if the government wants to create a new program and they want the people of Colorado to pay for it, the taxpayers, that they should have a say in that, and it should go to them for a vote. The reforms I would make to the Tabor Amendment are the caps that have prevented our state from keeping up with growth. And as our economy has grown and our state has grown, we've fallen farther behind in funding our education system, and we've fallen farther behind in managing that growth and making the investments in infrastructure to support that growth. And that's the reform we need to make to Tabor.
Should we keep the principle that voters need to sign off on new taxes, Ms. Lynne, and why or why not?
Yes, we should, because I think after 25 years, everybody's gotten used to it. It doesn't mean that it's the best policy, but yes, we should. There are other ways to tackle Tabor. We can change the formula. We can change the provision that doesn't allow us to introduce new taxes, like a real estate property transfer tax. We can work on new legislation that increases taxes that is exempt from the Tabor limit. So I think there's lots of room for us to tackle the problems that we have in Colorado without taking away that one provision.
All right. Same question to you, Mr. Johnston. Still having the consent of the voters, would you keep that core principle, and why or why not?
I would keep that component. I do think it's in the Colorado bloodstream right now. I would repeal the part that requires tax refunds. And one story on school funding that's linked to this Tabor problem. You know, when I started my career as a teacher more than 20 years ago and I met my wife, we were teaching in rural Mississippi at that point, and I remember we taught during the day and she would cocktail waitress at night. And she always used to joke that it was unfortunately true that she made more money cocktail waitressing than she did teaching. That would be funny if it weren't still true 20 years later in Colorado in 2017 or 18, which is, you know, first-year teachers in Montezuma County right now make $29,000 a year. That's just barely over minimum wage in those places, and that is no way to attract the most important professionals we need for the most important jobs that we have. And so this is why I think we're going to have to go to the ballot, and I've said I would in the first term to lead a coalition to repeal that refund mechanism so you could restore funding to schools to both increase pay for teachers, provide full-day kindergarten, eliminate the preschool wait list, and give kids access to the after-school and summer opportunities that kids need to make sure this system is fair.
Thank you much.
I want to talk about the Me Too movement and sexual harassment and the reckoning that America is having. A lot of your Democratic colleagues at the state legislature have taken on-the-record votes about how to deal with people who are accused of sexual harassment. For the first time tonight, I'm going to ask you for a show of hands on where you would have come down on the votes taken by Republicans and Democrats in the state legislature. By a show of hands, how many of you supported the expulsion of Representative Steve Lebsock from the House for sexual harassment? By a show of hands, how many of you supported the attempted expulsion of State Senator Randy Baumgartner from the State Senate for sexual harassment? Show of hands, how many of you believe that there should be serious consequences for Denver Mayor Michael Hancock for sexual harassment? I have a question for you, Ms. Kennedy. You were the chief financial officer and deputy mayor of Denver when the city made payouts to the mayor's close friend and body man, as well as a police detective who first claimed that she was sexually harassed by this body man and then by the mayor himself. You have said on the record that you were unaware of these payouts. As the chief financial officer, should you have been aware of those payouts? And did you ever witness or hear of inappropriate conduct by the mayor?
Yeah, Kyle, and that really goes to why I didn't raise my hand. I worked for the mayor, as you know, for almost 6 years. I've actually known him since high school. We went to high school together. I never saw anything inappropriate by Mayor Hancock. He was a first-rate professional as a boss in all those years that I worked with him. So when I saw those texts come out, you know, it was a real surprise. I am saddened. His conduct was clearly inappropriate. And as you know, I believe he needs to participate in training, and we really have to improve the processes that we have for women to be able to report. And we see that in the public sector, we're seeing it in the Capitol, we're seeing it in businesses across our state. People need a safe place, a confidential place where they can go and talk about these issues. And this has really highlighted the fact that we have not got those in place.
And as Chief Financial Officer, should you have been aware of the payouts to people in his inner circle while this was going on?
Yeah, so as the CFO for the City of Denver, we appropriate a lump sum to the City Attorney's Office for payments in personnel matters. There are dozens and dozens of them every year, and the City Attorney negotiates those. So no, I should not have known. It wouldn't have been appropriate for me to be there.
Thank you.
I have another question for the entire group. There has been a debate in Colorado over how much control local governments should have over oil and gas operations, especially when they happen close to neighborhoods. How much control should local governments have, in your opinion? And Mr. Johnston, we'll start with you.
I, about a month ago, had dinner up in Firestone with families who live down the street from the home that exploded almost a year ago. And those families are still terrified. They want to know that they're not going to be the next ones to go down into their basement to fix a hot water heater and have their home explode. And so I think there's a real conversation to have about how we keep this state safe. I think the right answer to this is we have to balance oil and gas development much more on the side of public health and safety than we have. I think the right answer to that is actually to have a set of statewide setbacks that make sure you're not having community by community negotiating against each other to see who will win a race to the bottom. So I believe that communities should have input and they should be able to advise on those kind of zoning measures, but I think the setbacks should be statewide, because what you're seeing right now is you have oil and gas companies who are trying to negotiate communities against each other, neighborhood by neighborhood. I think that's going to result in an inherently unfair system. So I think we have to push back setbacks. We have to make sure we cap these up to 1,000 orphan wells that could be leaking oil and gas into more homes, and we have to make sure we get zero leakage out of those pipelines.
Quick follow-up, if local voters actually pass something, should the state overrule them, as has been happening?
So I think it depends what the local voters do. I think there are some things local voters can do. What we know under the current Supreme Court is that local voters cannot ban access to those minerals because folks have a right to those. What I think they can do is be able to put in place important time and place and use restrictions. And I think what we don't want is a system where it's just about who has the most political power that gets the rig moved down the road. If you go to Greeley right now and you talk to the families at Bella Romero Elementary, they were going to place a big rig on the west side of Greeley. Those folks got really loud and complained, and so they moved it over to one of the lowest income elementaries in the city. I think if you have a system where folks are just forum shopping to who has the least political power, that will not serve all Colorado's communities, so you got to have a statewide set of rules.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kennedy, same question to you. How much control should local governments have?
So what we have right now is we're one of the largest energy producers in the country. And as our population is growing, you have a lot more energy production occurring really close to where people live. And families are fearful. They are fearful about their air quality, about their water quality. They're living with the impacts of large industrial operations right next to their neighborhoods. And so I believe we need to give local jurisdictions more of a voice. We need to give people who live in those communities more of an ability to look at water quality issues, air quality issues, noise, the lighting that comes with these, the siting of them. Local communities really know, and they have the power to regulate other industrial operations, and we need to give them more autonomy. Public health and safety has to be our first priority in regulating the oil and gas industry, and I believe that we can successfully have a very successful energy development program in this state and protect public health and safety.
Same follow-up question I asked to Mr. Johnston. If local voters pass something to shut it down, should the state intervene?
So the Supreme Court has already ruled they cannot ban operations in their communities, but we can certainly give them more authority to protect public health and safety of their residents.
Do you agree with that Supreme Court ruling?
Yeah, I don't think we should ban the industry in this state. I don't support shutting it down. I do believe that we need a regulatory environment that protects public health, safety, and welfare first, but allows for the development of the resource.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lynne, same question to you. How much control should local governments have over oil and gas?
And I want to challenge what the other two candidates said, because public health and safety is not a balancing act. It isn't something that should be a priority. It is the priority already in this administration. That's our number one lens that we look at when we look at these issues. So we've got a place, as you know, where there's more than just setbacks, there's more than just other kinds of indicators. We've got to live together in a community where there is oil and gas development, and there are houses. I do look at some of the communities that have taken a bold step to move forward and negotiate with an oil and gas company around, well, what are the noise impacts? How do we deal with this? Where do we locate the drilling? And I think that's the way that we lead in Colorado, is through collaboration. Oil and gas industry, they live in the same communities they're often drilling in. So they're not going to be ignoring some of those public safety and health issues, and I think through collaboration we can get this done.
I'll follow up on the same points I followed up with the others. Should local governments, if the voters of a local jurisdiction say shut it down and pass something, should the state overrule that?
I don't think the state should. I think they should use the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. They should use the ability the governor has as her bully pulpit to be able to prevent some of that getting even to the ballot, so we don't get involved in expensive legal battles.
But if it does happen, you think it should be allowed to continue?
I don't think it should be allowed to continue.
The ban should not be allowed. Okay. Thank you very much.
There are Democratic primary voters who see progressive momentum in this state and are hungry for Democratic politicians to be progressives, as opposed to just Democrats. Let me ask you to speak to them. What do you think is the most pressing social justice fight in Colorado that has not come up here for discussion, and how will you lead on it? Ms. Kennedy first.
So, Kyle, I think you're right. People in Colorado are so proud of our state. We are an innovative and forward-looking state. We have built what is today the top-ranked economy in the country. But the challenge we face is there are a lot of people in our state who aren't benefiting from our progress. And you look at different regions of Colorado, and our success and our prosperity isn't reaching everyone. And so I think the biggest social justice issue is making sure that everyone in our state has equal opportunities. It's one of the reasons I have made public education my top priority in this campaign. As I look at the inequities in our education system, communities of color, low-income communities, kids are not getting the educational opportunities that they need to succeed. When I was the state treasurer, I created a program that is rebuilding schools in the poorest communities in Colorado. You visit those schools, kids are going to class in rooms with lead pipes and asbestos and mold and sewage backups, and we need to do a much better job as a state making sure all the kids growing up in our state have equal opportunities in education.
Thank you, Ms. Lynne. The most pressing social justice fight that we haven't discussed here, and how will you lead on it?
It's simply about working families, working individuals whose wages have not gone up in real terms. And as you know, housing costs and healthcare costs, two issues I care passionately about, are eroding that even further. So it is a social justice issue, it's an equity issue. I was a working mom myself, and I know the challenges that people in Colorado have to deal with, whether it's daycare, childcare, it's healthcare, it's housing. We've got to tackle those problems and be progressive and be leading in this state, and not just look at a global, we're the #1 economy in Colorado, we're really proud of that, but in rural Colorado and even in parts of right here in Denver and Lakewood, we see huge disparities in working people whose minimum wage right now is $9 an hour. You can't afford to live here, and you can't afford health care on $9 an hour.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnston, do you agree that income inequality is the chief social justice fight ahead of Colorado?
I'd add another one we haven't mentioned, which is when I got elected, as you mentioned earlier, Kyle, I opened a community office in North Park Hill. I was the only legislator out of 100 that did that, and did it in an area that has historically been some of the most difficult gang violence in the state of Colorado. And we've had drive-by shootings there, we've had struggles, but we've also had our community members who are fighting to get themselves back up on their feet. And I think one of the major social justice issues is how do we reform our criminal justice system? So both we're keeping more and more folks out of the criminal justice system that don't belong there. And for folks who do end up in prison, how are we getting them back to be citizens as opposed to spending a lifetime on the margins? And so that's why I've come out with some big progressive stands on this, like making sure we actually stop criminalizing mental health and stop criminalizing drug addiction and stop criminalizing poverty. So those folks can get access to treatment, and you can reform cash bail so you don't have folks staying in jail for 5 months because they couldn't pay a $150 ticket. I think those matter. I think weaning the state off of private prisons who are making a buck off of keeping Coloradans incarcerated is also something we have to take on in an aggressive way. And I'm very proud of the fact that as a state senator, I got bipartisan work done in a lot of these areas. Racial profiling reform, sentencing reform, you wouldn't think as big Republican priorities, but we got them done together.
Thank you.
The next few minutes of this debate, we're going to drill down on the death penalty, and these are all going to be short answer questions because we have a few different things to ask about as we go down the list here. The first of these questions, I will admit, feels a little macabre, but the fact is, this is the second governor's race in a row where a man's life is literally hinging on the result of the vote. Nathan Dunlap murdered 4 people in a Chuck E. Cheese in Aurora. That was 25 years ago. Governor John Hickenlooper promised to leave the decision on his fate to the next governor, which all of you want to be. Dunlap's on death row, waiting for your order. Do you have him executed? And we'll go from left to right and start with you, Mr. Johnston.
I have said that I oppose the death penalty and I would sign a bill to repeal it. I have not said what I would do on current cases and controversy because I have friends who are survivors of those victims on death row. I think any governor owes a conversation to the family members who are affected before they make a decision about clemency. But I oppose the death penalty. I would repeal it.
You won't answer that question, though, here today.
I will not until I talk to their family members. I think that'd be inappropriate.
Okay. Ms. Kennedy.
So Brandon and I have always opposed the death penalty, and I would sign legislation and help lead the effort to repeal it here in Colorado. I don't think the state should take a life, and I also think there's an awful lot of evidence that shows that there is bias in the death penalty system. And so with respect to Nathan Dunlap, and there are 2 other individuals currently sitting on death row, all of them committed their crimes as adolescents. All of them actually came from the same community. There is an appeal process to the governor, and there is a file that the governor has the opportunity to review information that wasn't made public, that wasn't part of the trial. I will wait until I do my due diligence and review all of that information before making a decision.
Ms. Lynne, will you answer the question about what you would do with Nathan Dunlap?
My first day in office, I would not overturn this, but I would do a very collaborative process to understand the victims, survivors, and the judges, and quite frankly, the jury. So I oppose the death penalty as well. I've got to evaluate this case, just like the other cases that are pending.
When you say not oppose this, though, do you mean you would allow the execution to be carried out?
I would not allow the execution until I considered all the information. I think there's a lot of evidence that it's about mental health. These are not, and we just haven't, in 1994, we weren't thinking about mental health as an issue as we are today when we take a look at some of the crimes that are committed.
I've heard all of you say that you're interested in pursuing a repeal of the death penalty, so that's one area where you all agree. Would any of you say here and now that you would clear death row? That's been an option used by some governors to effectively end it in their states. Okay.
So,
We're going to go with no on that one.
Yeah, that sounded a lot like a no. Go.
We're about 5 minutes from closing statements. Just so that everybody's aware, we will try to squeeze in a bunch more questions. We have some targeted questions to individuals. First to you, Ms. Lynne. Some of the Republican state senators who supported your nomination to be lieutenant governor say they supported you because you privately pledged to them not to do what you are doing now, which is to use the appointment as a springboard to run for governor. So are those state senators lying, or did you go back on your word?
So I had conversations with not only every state senator, but most of the representatives when the governor asked me to step in and become the lieutenant governor and chief operating officer. Never made any such promise, never made it to any of those senators, and in fact asked John Hickenlooper. He never asked me to make the promise, and in fact he said I'm the most qualified candidate in this race, Republican or Democrat, and if he had any doubts or concerns, I don't think he would have gone there.
To be clear, you're saying that what they are saying is not true.
I never promised anyone I wouldn't run, and a lot of things have happened in the last 2 years, including Donald Trump being our president and the need for a strong governor who's actually doing huge parts of this job to be able to step in day one and take on what's going on in Washington.
I think that is the first time a candidate has mentioned Donald Trump in this debate, and that is astonishing to me because we're almost done.
That is somewhat fascinating.
On to you.
All right, Ms. Kennedy, you announced your candidacy in a live video on Facebook driving your car on the open road. You looked into a camera in the passenger seat, you glanced at notes on the dash while the car was moving, you told Westward you were thrilled that video went viral. I've heard from some Democratic voters who feel like it showed a little bit of poor judgment. What would you say to a voter who would ground their own teenage driver for that?
I'd probably ground mine. Look, I was trying to communicate with the voters of this state that I am a working mom. I drive carpool. That's who I am. And I understand that an awful lot of parents here in Colorado are spending an awful lot of time stuck in traffic, driving their kids to and from various activities. That is why I did the video. And I think, as I mentioned at the time, we drove, I think, 800 yards, and we had people on both sides of the road, making sure safety was absolutely first. I would not have done anything that wasn't safe.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston, you got into this race early to a lot of fanfare, and there was this huge influx of out-of-state money and some very big names getting behind you. Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook and Meg Whitman from HP. Yet you look at the scan polling in this race, and often you're in the single digits. Why do you suppose that out-of-state interests appear so much more enthused about your candidacy than Colorado Democrats?
Well, I think this race is just getting started, and tonight will be a big launch of that as people start to pay more and more attention to where Colorado's going. And I think they're really looking for someone who has the track record of being able to bring people together and solve big problems, and I think that's what I've done. I think that will grow. I'm very proud of the fact the majority of our donors are from in-state. We have support from folks who are proud of the courageous stands that I've taken, very proud that Michael Bloomberg is a big supporter of gun safety and looked around the country and said, where can I find elected officials who are really willing to walk the talk and be courageous on taking on one of the hardest issues of our time, and that's gun safety, and he thinks I'm the strongest candidate to do that. I'm proud to have that support. So I think what this last election has done has made people more aware and more engaged in politics than ever before, and they're looking for people who have the courage to build a new vision for where the country can go and to tackle hard problems and get them done. So I'm grateful those folks are coming to our campaign, and I think those numbers will just get bigger and bigger.
Thank you.
All right, I have our last question before we get to closing statements here. By show of hands, who on this stage supported Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton in the primary cycle last election? All right, well, that tells those folks what they need to know.
Looks like we've got a little additional time, so let me ask you this. There are community activists in North Denver who are vehemently opposed to CDOT's project, which broke ground this week. This is the I-70 rework through the north part of town. Would any of you as governor slow down or intervene in that process to address the environmental concerns or the concerns of people in the neighborhood? In our closing seconds, would anybody intervene in that process?
So intervene, yes. I would not stop that project. I do think there are major dislocation and safety and community risks that have to be addressed.
Would you put it on hold until you address them?
I would involve community members in the decision about how they're going forward. I think the basic pieces are in place, but there are problems that have to be fixed before it goes forward. I would fix.
Thank you.
All right, we're up against our wall for our 1-minute closing statements. This order was determined randomly. Ms. Kennedy will speak first, followed by Mr. Johnston and Ms. Lynne. Ms. Kennedy, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you again so much for having us here tonight. It's a great privilege to be here as a candidate for governor. I'm proud to have been a part of Colorado's leadership team. We are an innovative and forward-looking state. We have built one of the top economies in the country. I am running for governor to continue the great work we are doing here in our state and to make sure that everyone in Colorado benefits from our prosperity and from our progress. I think there are 3 things that we need to do as a state. We need to make public education our state's top priority. We need to make sure the kids that are growing up here in our state have access to great schools and great teachers. Colorado should have among the best public education system in the country, and I will lead to deliver that. We need to keep healthcare accessible and affordable for everyone, which is why I am calling to offer a public health insurance option, and we need to protect this beautiful state. As more people move into Colorado, we need to protect our public lands, our open space, our air quality and water quality. It's going to take real leadership, so thank you.
All right, Ms. Kennedy, we're out of time. Mr. Johnston.
Thank you both for having us. Thank you to my 2 friends who joined. I think it is easy at this moment to look around the country and say, how did we get here? How did we get to a place where this country feels more divided than ever before? I think the more important question facing us is, how do we get out of here? Right? When you think about generations past who first came to Colorado and faced that continental divide, that divide seemed uncrossable until we crossed it, and then built communities and families and businesses on both sides of that. Colorado was built by people who refused to be divided. Well, we're in a moment now where we face a different set of divides. And those are divides I've been crossing my entire life, between urban and rural, between black, white, and Latino, yes, between conservative and liberal. I know that Colorado has the capacity to bridge those divides. I've done it from teaching school in Mississippi to running schools in North Denver immigrant communities to opening offices in gang neighborhoods. But the question is now how we move forward, and I think that no divide is too big to cross if we have the courage to cross it together.
Mr. Johnston, thank you. Ms. Lynne.
Well, thanks, and thanks for everybody who's here in the audience and who's watching, because this is a critical election. You know, I'm Colorado's Lieutenant Governor and Chief Operating Officer. I started my morning at 6:30 in a meeting working on some healthcare issues and our budget. At 7 o'clock, I had a dentist appointment, though, and that was actually a little easier than this, just telling you. What I wish the voters could know about me is not who I am from a title perspective, but where I've come from. I've been a waitress. I worked my way through college, single mom, and I never thought I'd be standing in front of you tonight talking about being your next governor. But we need a strong governor who can continue our progress, who can fight for health care, who will fund education and work on housing issues. One thing I know, this is not a beginner job. This is not a learning job. I'm not a career politician. I've never run for office. I've never won an office. I've never lost an office. But I'm ready to lead on day one and would love your support. Thank you.
Ms. Lynne, thank you very much. A reminder to all of the folks watching at home that the Republican candidates for governor will debate here tomorrow night. Same time, 7 p.m., same channel, Channel 20. These are the first in what we hope will be a long series of very civil and productive debates, just like you have seen here tonight. Our thanks to our audience, very well behaved. Our thanks to our candidates, thoughtful and informed. Good night, everyone.